Hi guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 16 reviewed. Last time out, Season 15 was a little shaky, but who knows, maybe I will end up liking this season more. Just looking through the episode list for this season, I have seen most of these episodes before, but outside of a few exceptions I don't remember them all that well. That will hopefully make it a bit more exciting to go through them again. In regards to the staff for this season, it is mostly the same old, as to be expected from this era. However, Matt Selman and Ian Maxtone Graham were credited as executive producers. That is something we haven't seen before. I'm not sure how much of a difference it will make, but it's still a change to note nonetheless. Before we begin, as ever, a thanks to the Simpsons wiki for their valuable information, and to you guys if you have been enjoying this whole review series so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. Believe me, I'm going to need all of the motivation I can get as we edge towards season 20. Anyway, with all the formalities done, let's look at these episodes. Season 16, Episode 1, Treehouse of Horror 15. The three short stories this year are The Ned Zone, 4 Beheadings and a Funeral, and In the Belly of the Boss. So some trivia which kind of relates to the Treehouse of Horror series in general, is that due to a Fox schedule change, this is the last Treehouse of Horror to be a season premiere, and my best moment was the ending to the Ned Zone. So the season opener gets a 4 out of 5. So part 1 casts Ned in an interesting position. It was a nice change of pace to see Flanders of all people having visions of other people's deaths and trying to prevent them. I think it was pretty clever how the whole thing was initiated by Homer with the frisbee, only to end up with him blowing up the town. It was also a nice touch that both visions Ned had about him ended up being true. He did end up shooting Homer, but Homer still pressed the destruct button anyway. Don't ask me why there was a core destruct button in the plant in the first place though. Still, this was the best of the 3 parts for me. Part 2 was obviously a take on Jack the Ripper. I was not a big fan of it to be honest. There was not too many jokes here and that is mainly why. The only decent one was between Bart and the recently murdered Selma, who briefly comes back to life to correct him. The attempted mystery here was also not particularly well done. It was too short for me to get invested in, and there was no real foreshadowing that it was Wiggum either. Also, the over-the-top English accents annoyed me to be honest. They weren't even done consistently, because some of the characters spoke with the accent and some did not. Just quite a dull part really. The final segment was interesting. It reminds me of a SpongeBob episode, but this episode actually predates that one by a few years, so that is good to know. I sort of liked the voyage the family took inside of Burns, and his uncomfortable reactions to it all. Homer also had a few funny lines, whether he was ranting about science or eating Mr. Burns' ribs. The ending of Homer expanding under Mr. Burns' skin was quite weird, but I guess it was an impactful way to end the story at least. Overall, this Treehouse of Horror had one standout segment, which is just about enough to push this episode into the good category. Season 16, Episode 2, All's Fair in Oven War. Marge gets into competitive baking, and when she sees other contestants cheating, she decides to herself. Meanwhile, Bart finds some old Playdude magazines that Marge threw out, and starts behaving like the people in them. So my trivia here is that when airing in the UK, the final scene of all the hillbilly shooting was cut when Brandine got out of the car. My best moment here was Bart turning his treehouse into a Playdude mansion. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This episode would have been rated higher had Marge's plotline been better developed. It started off quite promisingly by showing off her baking skills, and I was interested in seeing how she did in a baking contest. I thought the whole thing took a bad turn though. Everyone at the contest is so mean to her, which is not that bad by itself, but it's so over the top that it didn't really seem believable to me. Also, the whole moral dilemma that Marge has about whether to cheat or not was not particularly impactful. It was obvious that she would do the right thing to set an example for Lisa. Bart's Playboy style subplot works a bit better though. It was a clever thing to do to have Bart find the magazines after Marge had already cut out all of the nudity. They use that to good effect, as he has this idea of what a Playboy style of party is, but he of course does not actually understand the real meaning behind it. That is until Homer tells him, of course, in that hilarious scene. The way in which Bart instantly goes to tell all of the other neighborhood kids was pretty funny, and probably quite realistic too, I might add. The best jokes in the episode also came from the subplot. such as Homer telling Bart that the reason him and Marge share the same bed is that they are poor. And why are they poor? Because they had kids. I also quite like the Godfather-esque ending with James Caan, who had a good cameo appearance in the episode. Season 16, Episode 3, Sleeping with the Enemy. Bart and Lisa feel that Marge is over-mothering them, so she shares her love with Nelson instead. This angers Bart when he is forced to share his room with Nelson. So, when Homer draws a picture of himself, it looks similar to his original design. This included him having a G for his ear and an M as his hair, which would form Matt Groening's initials. And my best moment was just seeing Marge spending some time with Nelson. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. Now, this might be considered a hot take, I don't know, but I did not really like this episode. Sure, on paper it seems like a nice idea to try and touch on Nelson's backstory some more, to really flesh out why he is the way he is. Still, while it is okay in parts, it has a few things in it which kind of felt off. For a start, I think his bullying of Bart was a bit overplayed here. Sure, we all know that he has his run-ins with Bart from time to time, but we've not actually seen too much of that dynamic lately. If anything, they are portrayed as friends more often than not. That is why it felt a bit jarring for this episode to focus on a bullying dynamic to such a great extent. The episode also had too much of a wacky ending for me to take too seriously. I mean, they tried to make the plot kind of serious and kind of hard-hitting, but then when the ending is like that, it just does not suit the tone of the episode at all. I mean, I'm not really a fan of bringing Nelson's dad back anyway, but if you are gonna do it, then you have to come up with a better explanation than, oh, I was kidnapped by a circus because of my peanut allergy. I mean, what is that all about? Unfortunately, Lisa's subplot did not fare much better. It just felt a bit redundant, really. And Sherry and Terry just got on my nerves here. I guess it was kind of nice to see Nelson get them back in the end, but it was not worth sitting through all of their nonsense just for that. The jokes also kind of let the episode down, as they were not particularly funny. The only redeeming thing about this, in my opinion, was seeing Marge bond a little with Nelson. They are kind of an odd pairing, so it was nice to see them hang out. I also liked Marge's roast of Nelson's mom. She kind of deserved to get put in her place, to be honest. In the end though, this episode had potential that ultimately went unfulfilled. Season 16, Episode 4, She Used to Be My Girl. Marge discovers that her high school journalism partner, Chloe, is now a network TV news reporter. Lisa looks up to Chloe, but friction soon develops between her and Marge. So, some trivia here is that Lisa points out to Marge that the juice is still on the loose. This is of course a reference to O.J. Simpson being acquitted of murder. And my best moment was Barney rescuing Chloe in his helicopter. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. Another plot that just felt a bit off to me. It just had a bad tone throughout, which was personified by Marge and Chloe. Every time they were on screen together, they were just annoying. It was either Chloe being patronizing to Marge, or Marge being passive-aggressive towards Chloe. Needless to say, it made them both feel unlikable. Now, I guess Marge's position is a bit more understandable. After seeing how everyone is so awestruck by Chloe, it is fair enough that she feels frustrated that her life didn't turn out that way. I don't think they did a good enough job showing the things that she has going for her though. Sure, we get that scene of Homer half-heartedly trying to cheer Marge up, but it felt like there was room for some character growth for Marge that in the end was never even attempted. Just like the last episode, the ending was silly. The whole active volcano came out of nowhere, and the way Marge rescues Lisa was oh so predictable. Thinking about it, since when did Springfield even have a volcano anyway? If I'm missing something, please inform me in the comments, but I don't think I am. The only redeeming quality this episode had is seeing Barney flying again. We had not seen it since he first got his pilot lessons, so it was nice to see him save Chloe after she left him all those years ago. In terms of the jokes, they are not up to scratch really. The only one I found amusing was Homer thinking that Marge and Chloe were fighting over him. Not much else to say on this one. It just left kind of a bad taste in the mouth. Season 16, Episode 5, Fat Man and Little Boy. When Bart writes slogans on t-shirts, he soon becomes a t-shirt mogul. With Bart now the breadwinner, Homer feels he no longer has a place in the family. So, the song I'm Too Sexy by Right Said Fred plays when Bart models his t-shirts. And my best moment was Bart creating his t-shirts. This one gets a 3 out of 5. The story here was solid enough. Bart feeling less like a kid was not that convincing, but it did at least lead to him making t-shirts, so it worked out quite well. It again shows off his creative side, and as I have said numerous times by this point, I think that works really well for him. I also think one or two of the lines on the shirts were quite clever. It makes it believable that people of all ages would be interested in buying them. That being said, the character of Goose Gladwell never really did much for me. They went for this Willy Wonka type parody, but this guy never had any charm to him, unlike Willy Wonka. Because of that, he just felt out of place really. The bit of Homer spending more time with Lisa also felt like it was going to be a bigger deal than it actually was. It never got resolved at all, and instead, it worked as a way to close out Bart's story. The jokes here were better than the last few episodes, but still only average. I did laugh at Flanders interpreting "get bent" as bending down to pray. I also enjoyed the analogy of the lions when it came to Bart replacing Homer as a breadwinner. However, every joke involving Goose fell flat, as did many of the others, which knocks this episode down a touch. Season 16, Episode 6, Midnight Rex. The citizens of Springfield are no longer able to afford their prescription drugs. In order to keep the town medicated, Homer, Grandpa, Apu, and Flanders travel to Canada. The title of this episode is a parody of the film Midnight Express, and my best moment was Ned meeting the Canadian version of himself. This episode is a 3 out of 5. The plot was fairly simple. Mr. Burns pulls a Mr. Burns and cancels his workers' drug program. This prompts other companies to cancel theirs, thus leaving the town lacking their usual prescriptions. They do get some decent concepts out of this debacle. As expected, they have some jabs at drug prices in the US, and juxtapose this well with Canada. And it is Canada where Homer, Grandpa, Ned, and Apu go to smuggle drugs back to Springfield. The scenes in Canada were the best in the episode for me, and they were consistently funny. As I mentioned, I loved Ned meeting his Canadian clone, and the gibberish conversation they have is a classic. As is Ned's line of, "They warned me Satan would be attractive," after he is offered some weed. I also like them trying to get past border security. Apu screaming with a towel wrapped around his head is a joke that might not be very PC, but it was still one I found funny. The ending was a bit wacky, with Mr. Burns' old plane crashing and whatnot, but hey, it did work out for everyone in the end. Even Smithers, who Mr. Burns decides to save only because he did not want to teach someone new his fighting system. Season 16, Episode 7, Mommie Beerest. Moe's is closed by a health inspector, so Homer takes out a mortgage on his house to open a bar again. As a result, Marge becomes Moe's business partner, which worries Homer. My trivia here is that during the end credits, Homer and Marge sing Captain Antonio's song "Love Will Keep Us Together." This was actually a deleted scene from Codependence Day. My best moment here was the Cards movie. This episode is a 4 out of 5, and I only gave this a 4 because there were quite a few good moments here. The actual plot is nothing special. If anything, it seems a bit Family Guy-esque, in the way that it sacrifices some of the story for wacky humour. Still though, I think that it mostly gets away with it. I liked the idea of Moe's getting a proper health inspector check, and Homer taking out another mortgage to open a bar. The fact that Homer did take out another mortgage did give Marge a legitimate reason to get involved. I also think that the dynamic between her and Moe mostly works. It was interesting seeing them spend time together doing up the bar, even if the British pub gimmick got left behind. Also, it has been kind of established by this point that Moe has a thing for Marge, so it is no surprise that he tries to get with her. The ending is a farce, with Homer chasing down a moving plane to win Marge back. It is not good by any means, but unlike some other endings in this season, this one at least fits in with the wacky tone of the episode. The jokes were good overall, and are the main reason why I enjoyed this. As I mentioned, the Cars movie that Homer and Marge watch is quite cool. It is a good take on the type of animation that certain companies were doing at that time. The jerk-ass Homer reference I also liked. That was no doubt a nod to the online fans, who had started circulating that phrase around the time this episode aired. Most saying I may have dodged a bullet here, after witnessing Homer and Marge's lovey-dovey talk, was also pretty good. Now, I can see why some people may not like this episode, as there are some ridiculous moments. For me though, the comedy did enough to make me forget about the shortcomings. Season 16, Episode 8, Homer and Ned's Hail Mary Pass. After Homer starts to teach players celebration dances, He's placed in charge of the Super Bowl halftime show. He decides to get Ned to help him create it. So some interesting trivia about this episode is that it had 23.1 million viewers, making it one of the highest rated episodes in the show's history. And my best moment was Mr. and Mrs. Pac-Man's wedding at the old Super Bowl halftime show. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. So this is the second episode to have a major focus on the Super Bowl, the first being Season 10's Sunday Cruddy Sunday. This one I found to be slightly better than that one, actually. The plot started out fine. I enjoyed Ned making his religious films, and all of the confused moments that came from Rod and Todd. Homer getting a job choreographing celebration dances was a bit more random, but hey, there was some entertainment to be found in just how much he reveled in the bad sportsmanship. The ending, however, falls rapidly flat. Homer and Ned's halftime show was not only boring for the characters in the show, it was also boring for me as a viewer, which I assume was not the writer's intention, and if it was their intention, then it was a stupid decision. Not only was it boring, there was no aftermath to it either. We just get a 20-second scene at the Simpsons house, and that is it. We don't even get to see Ned's reaction to his religious message being unanimously panned. Regardless of this up and down story, the jokes were okay at least. There were a few I found funny, like Carl replying, "What a tool," to Reverend Lovejoy rambling about how great his sermon is. Marge's hair blocking the spectator's view of the game was also quite good. It has never really been brought up before, but damn is this so true. I would hate to be stuck behind Marge at a cinema or a sports game. As I mentioned, I also really liked the Pac-Man wedding for some reason. I don't even know why I liked it so much, so don't bother asking. I can for sure see why some people would have a big problem with this episode, with the not so great uses of guest stars and so on, but for me there is enough amusing moments to at least keep me somewhat entertained. Season 16, Episode 9, Pranksta Rap. Homer and Marge don't let Bart go to a rap concert, but he decides to escape and go anyway. To avoid getting into trouble, he tells his parents that he was kidnapped. So a bit of information about this one is that the Salad of the Christ, which was briefly shown on TV, is a parody of both The Passion of the Christ and Veggie Tales. And my best moment was Bart rapping. I gave this episode a 4 out of 5. The plot here I found pretty engaging. Sure, Bart disobeying Homer and Marge and going to a rap concert does not sound that special, but there is a few twists and turns as the story progresses. For a start, Bart at the concert is great. I like the little bit of rap that he does. It is decent lyrically, and Nancy Cartwright actually does a good job of voicing it. After the concert, when Bart wants to hide away, it makes sense that he does it at Kirk Van Houten's place, given that he is always at work. I even like the new positions that it puts characters in. For example, Wiggum solves the case and is promoted to police commissioner. Then, when he learns Bart's kidnapping was a hoax, he does not want to give that position up. I also like how Kirk's life is so pathetic that being put in prison is actually an improvement for him. The joke about him having lots of attention from women as a criminal is also quite realistic. I also love the whole conspiracy that Homer, Bart, Wiggum and Kirk engage in. It is just great fun to see them try and outsmart Lisa and the people trying to uncover their conspiracy. Like a lot of the recent episodes though, the biggest flaw here is the ending. Sure, Lisa trying to uncover the truth is to be expected, but the big standoff the rappers have with Wiggum is just a bit flat. Also, once again, the ending leaves me wanting more information about what happened to the characters next. At least the jokes were decent throughout. I liked some of Homer's lines here, such as his rap to Bart and the "love the lie" line to Lisa. I also like how Wiggum found out where Bart was, only because he and Kirk were, in Apu's words, the only two idiots cheap enough to buy the crap popcorn. All in all, this was a surprisingly entertaining episode that was only somewhat let down by its ending. Season 16, Episode 10, There's Something About Marrying. In an attempt to boost tourism, Springfield legalizes same-sex marriage. Homer decides to capitalize by hosting wedding ceremonies himself, including one for Patty. So, my trivia for this episode is that it had a parental discretion advised warning before the show. The first and only time The Simpsons had that so far. And my best moment here was the ending. So, was Springfield legalizing gay marriage a good decision? For me it was. I gave this episode a 5 out of 5. So as I said, there was a bit of a palaver about this episode when it first aired. However, much like the season 8 episode Homer's Phobia, I think it's fair to say that this episode is hardly anything by today's standards. In terms of what I think about this episode, as you might have guessed, I did like it. They handled the plot very well. They did a good job of exploring everyone's opinions on gay marriage, while at the same time keeping it light-hearted. Homer is the one who keeps it that way. I love how he doesn't care about any of the moral side of it, and the only thing he cares about is how much money he can make off these ceremonies. His over-the-top nature stopped the plot from taking itself too seriously, which I thought was needed. Now, not all of the plot is wacky stuff. It is nice to see Patty get a proper story again. The episode also does a good job at showing Marge having a hard time accepting that Patty is gay. We all know that Marge is an accepting person, but at the end of the day, if one of your family members tells you this out of the blue, then for some people it would take a while for them to truly get to grips with that and for it to sink in. That does not necessarily make them a bad person or a bigot or anything. And for that reason, I think Marge was exactly the right person to use to get this type of message across. The ending was also a good one. Of course you have the obvious message of accepting people for who they are, and that is shown well by Marge. I'm just glad that Patty refused to get married to Veronica as a man. Not only because he is not attracted to men, but at the end of the day, the guy continued to lie to her about his gender. If someone is willing to deceive you like that, then it's probably not the best grounds for a successful marriage. I'm just saying. There are also some good jokes on offer here. I laughed at Mayor Quimby saying, "Well, that settles it. Let's legalize gay money. Gay marriage." Also, Patty and Homer spitting out their tea in disgust after Marge says she feared Patty would try and steal Homer away from her was also pretty good. Overall, this episode was only just a 5 for me, but there were a few genuinely funny moments, and the tone was great throughout. Now, I'm also going to hit you guys with maybe an unpopular opinion here, but I think I prefer this episode over Homer's Phobia, to be honest. The ending of this episode is just much better than the ending of that one, where you had the whole John saving Homer and the guy's life from deers. That was just kind of meh to me. But the ending here was actually impactful. So yeah, a bit of a hot take for you guys there. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Season 16, Episode 11. On a clear day, I can't see my sister. Lisa becomes fed up with Bart's teasing and takes out a restraining order against him. Meanwhile, Homer gets a job as a supermarket greeter. So a fact about this one is that Grandpa was previously seen working at Sprawl Mart in season 15 episode The Fat and the Furriest. So that's a rare bit of good continuity there. My best moment was Bart having to stay in Willie's shack. This one is a 2 out of 5. The main conflict here of Lisa getting a restraining order on Bart is just so over the top. They never made anything out of it either. Lisa just gets this 20-foot pole and keeps poking Bart with it all the time. Bart was bullying Lisa on the trip to the glacier, which she probably did deserve some consequences for. However, it was clear that the order by itself was causing both Bart and the family discomfort. So the fact that Lisa goes out of her way to harass Bart with it makes her just as unlikable as him. There is never really any attempt to expand on their characters, as we never got down to why they are acting this way towards each other. Instead, the episode ends with Lisa suddenly forgiving Bart, which I didn't really care about or buy into. They just spent the whole episode being mean to each other for very little reason, and I can only assume that that would continue in the future, so why exactly should I take this as a happy ending? Homer has a little story here about taking over Abe's job as a customer greeter at a supermarket. It was kinda lame, and had this weird conclusion of him being microchipped, then stealing stuff from the store, just not at all engaging. The jokes found here were at best average. As I said, I did like Bart spending school time in Willie's shack. The line, "Then you'll be teaching Willie," was the best one of the episode. Also, I did like Bart's brief transition into a kind of wild child living out in the backyard. I kind of wish they did more with that, to be honest. To go with those decent moments, there were lots of poor ones though, such as Skinner making out with a mummified skeleton to somehow try and get back at Edna. That was just cringeworthy, to be honest. And the video on restraining orders the family watched went on for far too long. This overall was a poor episode which had what is probably best described as a mean-spirited tone to it. Season 16, Episode 12, Goo Goo Gai Pan. After finding out that she can no longer have a baby, Selma decides that she wants to adopt one. As the Springfield orphanage is empty, Lisa suggests adopting a baby from China. However, in order to get the baby, Homer must pretend to be married to Selma. My trivia for this one is that the original broadcast had the body of Mao Zedong covered by the communist flag as it is in real life. However, in later broadcasts, the flag was substituted for the flag of China. My best moment was the ending. I gave this episode a 4 out of 5. So this is technically another travel episode, but this one differs from most of the others. It was much more story driven, and because of that, it did not lose focus in the main thing which we cared about, which was Selma adopting a baby. In terms of that change, I feel like it is a welcome one. It is certainly a way to freshen up Selma's situation, and I am glad it ended up being a permanent change. The ending where Selma has a frank conversation with Madame Wu and convinces her to let her keep the baby was a simple but good scene. Selma went through a lot of ups and downs in the episode, so I am glad that there was a happy ending for her. Homer does indeed hijack the story somewhat in Act 2, but given that he had to pretend to be Selma's husband, I think that's kind of fair enough. He did produce a few funny moments like his failed acrobatics. Some other things I liked here was Madame Wu's condescending tone with Lisa when she tells her that she will have a Chinese sibling that will surpass her academically, as well as the adoption guy saying, "Oh yes, big star, we know he's not married to you," after Selma was trying to say that MacGyver was her husband. There were a few jokes I didn't like though. Mr. Burns' lungs as airbags was one, and Homer's heart being taken out of him was another. These are just the type of gruesome, unrealistic physical gags which have become far too common lately. Still though, the good here did outweigh the bad, and as such, this episode just about scrapes a 4. Season 16, Episode 13, Mobile Homer. Homer buys an RV, which causes a rift between him and Marge. In an attempt to get them back together, Bart and Lisa steal the RV to take it back to the dealership. My trivia here is that the spider poison that Homer uses is called Charlotte's Dead, which is of course a parody of the children's book Charlotte's Web. The thing I liked best about this episode was Homer and Marge trying to entice the kids to stay with them, as the kids keep running back and forth between the house and the RV. This episode I gave a 3 out of 5. So this is yet another plot revolving around Homer moving out after an argument with Marge. This time, however, he buys an RV and plonks it right on the back garden. This was kind of a fun premise by itself, to be honest. I think it works well too, as it allows Bart and Lisa to be right there in between Homer and Marge. We usually don't get to see much of their perspective on Homer and Marge's fallouts, but here they have their parents competing with each other over who gets their attention. The scene where they are trying to tempt them is quite good, and Homer wins that battle by promising to have Christmas tomorrow. Some other good parts of the episode, which deserve a mention, was Homer cleaning the garage at the start. I like how it goes wrong in such an over-the-top way, and how it differed so wildly to what Marge imagined Homer was doing. We also got to see Bob the RV salesman again, albeit in a small cameo. The ending was slightly weak though, as Bart and Lisa end up crashing the RV onto a boat. Yeah, don't even ask how that happened. This episode is very much a matter of taste, as there is some out of place moments, and the slapstick type of violence is a bit overused at times. Still though, the simple premise of Homer owning an RV carries the day, and is helped along by a number of good moments. Season 16, Episode 14, The Seven-Beer Snitch. After the town enforces old-time laws, Homer gets arrested. He gets put in a new state prison where he becomes a snitch. Meanwhile, Bart and Lisa try to find out why Snowball 2 has been gaining weight. So my trivia for this episode is that the title is a play on a 1955 comedy, The 7-Year Itch. And my best moment was the classical music concert. This episode is another 3 out of 5. I think both of the stories here had potential, but they both ended up being kind of average. I did like how the Springfieldians decided to build the concert hall just as a screw you to Shelbyville. It kind of reminds me of how they ended up buying the monorail in Marge vs. the Monorail. The design of the concert hall was also pretty clever. It did a good job of showing off some of the weirder elements of modern architecture. Once the concert predictably fails and Burns turns the place into a private prison, of course some shady stuff goes down. Homer being chucked in prison for breaking an old-time law was a bit silly, and the time he spent as a prison snitch wasn't as entertaining as it could have been. This was made clear by the ending, which I found to be very anticlimactic, which is quite the achievement really, given that it was a prison riot and a chase scene rolled into one. The subplot was also okay. It was interesting to see Snowball 2 get another family, and have Bart and Lisa trying to get her back, although it probably would have had more impact if they didn't kill the original Snowball 2 off last season. What helps this episode out is that it was sprinkled in with quite a few good jokes and funny moments. This is especially true at the failed concert. I love how everyone gets up to leave right after hearing the da-na-na-na, da-da-da-da. Wiggum's line of "the rest is just filler" is one that I found particularly funny. I also liked Homer revealing that he has an inside tip that global warming is all a bunch of crap. So to summarize, story-wise I think this episode is kind of average, but comedy-wise it's slightly above par. That levels this out to a decent episode. Season 16, Episode 15, Future Drama. Bart and Lisa stumble into Professor Frink's basement, where he gives them a look at their future as teenagers. So a bit of fairly obvious trivia is that the title of this episode is a reference to Futurama, and Bender even makes a cameo appearance in the episode. My best moment was Homer's house under the sea. This episode gets a 2 out of 5 from me. So I think The Simpsons typically does future episodes quite well. However, this one definitely goes alongside Bart to the Future as ones which weren't quite done as well. Much like Bart to the Future, I think the main problem here is that they try to introduce too many plot elements. Let me just list out some of them for you. You have Lisa in a relationship with Milhouse, Bart in one with Gender, Homer and Marge have separated, Bart saves Mr. Burns, so he takes Lisa's Yale scholarship, Marge gets with Krusty, only to get back with Homer in the end. Then finally, Bart gives his scholarship back to Lisa. There is just so much going on here. On one hand, I admire the writers for trying to fit so much in, and to their credit, they do give us a good look at various side characters in the future. Still though, all of the main plot points kind of get lost in the shuffle, and because none of them get that much screen time, I'm not particularly invested in any of them. The plots don't really connect with each other very well either, which kind of adds to the episode's cluttered feel. Also, the comedy wasn't particularly good here. I did of course like Bart and Lisa arguing about who is gay for Mole Man. Sadly though, it is no one. Also, as I said, I did enjoy the absurdity of Homer owning a house at the bottom of the ocean. I guess he finally got to fulfill his under the sea fantasy from Homer Badman. The animation under the sea during the end sequence was also great, and a nice way to end on. Season 16, Episode 16. Don't Fear the Roofer. Homer befriends Roofer Ray Magini. However, as he never shows up to fix the roof, Marge believes that Ray is a figment of Homer's imagination. Some trivia about this one is that the Calmwood Mental Hospital from Hurricane Neddy is seen again. And my best moment here was Homer jumping around on the roof, then falling off. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. Quite simply, you shouldn't be taking this episode too seriously. And if you do take it that way, it will no doubt hurt your enjoyment of this particular episode. It's much better to take it as a farce that it is, and if you do that, there is entertainment to be found. Sure, there was a heavy reliance on guest stars, and the ending was full of plot holes, but the episode somehow manages to take all of this in its stride, and continues to be enjoyable all the way through. I like the scene early on where Homer ruins Lenny's surprise party at Moe's. The way in which everyone at the bar turned on him kind of reminded me of the season 6 episode Fear of Flying. From there, Homer finds a new bar, and that is where he meets Ray. The dynamic between Homer and Ray is what makes the episode work for me. They have great chemistry together, and I totally buy that Homer gets taken in by this guy. I was not as big a fan of Homer's time in therapy, but it was needed to get into the ending. Now, about that ending, it is totally ridiculous that the guy with the eye patch did not hear Ray or see him from another angle, and Stephen Hawking's explanation about a mini black hole blocking Bart from seeing him was even more out there. Despite all this, I didn't really mind the ending, to be honest, because as Ray pointed out, it was all just a total farce, and it was clearly meant to be that way. Also, the first time I watched this episode, I assumed that he really was all in Homer's imagination. So it was kind of a cool twist to see that Homer really did make a new friend. With a crazy story like this, then you do need to make it funny, and this episode did not disappoint in that department. I liked how Santa's little helper was quickly brought down to the eldest level after he stayed at the retirement castle. Homer was the main source of amusement here though. I liked his incoherent ramblings at several points in the episode, especially on the roof as he became more desperate to see Ray. He even laughed off falling from the roof like a champ. The ending credits sequence where Ray tries and fails to drill into Homer's mind the time of Everybody Loves Raymond on CBS was also amusing. It's just a shame really, that part is often cut out on re-releases. So yeah, this episode has its flaws, and I won't blame you if you dislike it, but I just have a bit of a soft spot for it. Season 16, Episode 17, The Heartbroke Kid. Vending machines appear at Springfield Elementary, and Bart quickly gets hooked on junk food. After he suffers a heart attack, he is sent to fat camp to kick his addiction. This episode's title is a pun on the 1972 film The Heartbreak Kid, and my best moment was the new intro with Fat Bart. So did I like this episode as much as Bart likes junk food? I didn't like it quite that much, but I still did enjoy it, and as such I gave it a 4 out of 5. So despite some of the themes on show here, again I don't think this is a plot to be taken that seriously. Of course it makes the obvious message about addiction and unhealthy food. That was fine and all, but the satire here about that side of things was so exaggerated that the episode never got like depressing or anything. I mean, with Bart having a heart attack and the family having to rent the house out to pay for his treatment, it could have been tackled in a much darker way. I am happy with the approach they took though, as it allowed for a lot more silly moments and by extension, more laughs. Some of the goofy moments here include Seymour's army fantasy with his plastic soldiers, Willie's brief attempt at skateboarding, and the 3 weeks later intro scene, which was the best moment. That was just a creative thing to do, and it was topped off by the Jacques line. Since they had Albert Brooks back anyway, it was nice that they got him to do a line as Jacques, especially given that he had been part of the intro scene for what, 15 years by this point. Bart's time at Fat Camp was a bit abrupt, but it did get the job done. It was satisfying to see him wreck all of the vending machines. The credits scene of Homer arguing with the Fat Camp instructor was quite funny too. I don't have anything else to say on this. Not a particularly deep episode, but still an enjoyable one. Season 16, Episode 18, A Star is Torn. After singing a song to her ill family, Lisa enters Krusty's Little Star Maker. Homer becomes her songwriter. However, his cutthroat attitude puts a strain on their relationship. So my trivia here is that Krusty's Little Star Maker is indeed a parody of American Idol, despite the fact that, in the episode, it claims that it's not affiliated with American Idol, and we've never even heard of American Idol. My best moment was Lisa singing a song Homer wrote about Springfield. I gave this episode a 3 out of 5. Much like Homer's management style, this plot was a bit rough around the edges, but it got the job done. I did enjoy seeing Homer nurture Lisa's singing talents, and the songs that he writes for her were quite good. The episode also really nails what these type of singing contest TV shows are all about. They are all about appearances and pandering to the audience. Very rarely is actual talent the deciding factor in who wins. As for how Homer acted here, he was acting overly jerkish at times, so he definitely had it coming when Lisa told him off. I think Act 3 though in general fell into the trap of being a bit too sappy. I understand that they went for the sweet moment of Homer and Lisa making up. I just didn't feel the emotional impact in it personally. I think that's why I'm mixed on the ending in general. On one hand, it was nice to see Lisa actually win one of these competitions for a change. But with the way that Homer sabotaged Cameron, it kind of seems like Lisa wouldn't normally be happy to win that way. It just goes against what her character is usually all about. The jokes here were just as much of a mixed bag as the plot. I liked how the applause meter that Krusty gets keeps injuring him. It serves him right for being too lazy to do his job. However, I found Homer's over-the-top yelling in a car to be more annoying than it was funny. In the end, a 3 is just the perfect rating for this episode. It is alright, without being good. Season 16, Episode 19, Thank God It's Doomsday. Homer hears about the rapture, and using numerology, he learns that it is only 1 week away. So some trivia about this one is that the crash of the Duff blimp is a reference to the Hindenburg disaster. And my best moment here was the Left Below movie. This one got a 4 out of 5 from me. This was a very engaging episode actually. Obviously it is the typical Doomsday prophet storyline, with some satire about religion mixed in, but it does have a few unexpected twists. After a fun little intro of Bart and Lisa getting bad haircuts at the mall, they end up watching the Left Below movie with Homer. It was a great little parody of those type of movies, and it threw out quite a few clever lines, such as "I thought all religions were a path to God, I was wrong," or "Why did I choose to be gay?" and "The baby I chose to have baptized is gone." These lines were very concise and on point about pointing out some of the contradictions in certain religions. Now I probably have to say that even though I'm not religious myself, I don't typically like to bash religion too much or make fun of religious people, but still I have to admit that those lines do a good job of pointing out some of the illogical arguments that some zealots do make. As we move on, Homer somehow convinces the whole town that the end is nigh, and he is predictably proven wrong. After that embarrassment, Homer is kicked about by the town for a few minutes, so I was kind of glad to see him recalculate and tell everyone that the rapture was coming again. Only this time, his family, perhaps understandably, choose to ignore him. Then we get the twist that Homer was actually right all along, which was a surprising change of pace. The section that he's in heaven is okay, and he uses his powers of persuasion to get God to postpone the rapture and save his family. Now this may be a bit controversial to some people, but I think it all worked out pretty well in the end. It's not like Homer hasn't met God before, he met him in Homer the Heretic. So bringing him back here when the plot actually fits, I don't mind at all. In terms of the jokes here, they were not amazingly funny, but they were okay. I already mentioned my favourite ones that came from the movie, although I did like how Marge was getting worried about Homer only because he didn't touch his second dinner. Season 16, Episode 20, Home Away from Homer. After Homer humiliates Ned Flanders, the Flanders family move to Humbleton, Pennsylvania. Soon a sports coach moves into Flanders' house and causes havoc. So if you look closely at the church scene in this episode, Ruth Powers appears twice, while the old Jewish man and Herman appear twice outside Flanders' house. Maybe a bit of lazy animation going on there? And my best moment was Ned just easily overpowering the coach. I gave this episode a 3 out of 5. The plot here is nothing we have not seen before, with Homer doing something bad to Ned, which he has to make up for. But it does at least get the characterization of Homer and Ned down pretty well. They do both act very in character. Homer not telling Ned about this stuff going on is pretty inconsiderate, but at least he does seem to genuinely regret it when it causes Ned to move. Although how much of that is down to his new jerk of a neighbour is up for debate. As far as Ned goes, him moving town was a bit abrupt, and the town he went to was rather bland. Now I know that was kind of the point, with it being the place that made all of these Hummels, but still. The scenes in that town were a bit boring, if I'm honest, and it was fairly obvious that Ned would end up moving back to Springfield. At least the scene where he does get his house back is the best in the episode. I liked how this coach had been built up as this hard man all episode by bullying Homer. Then Ned just completely destroys him without even trying. It kind of makes sense too, as Ned is often hinted at having this kind of strength. So yeah, the story here was solid but not spectacular, and in the same mould, the jokes were okay but could have been better. Season 16, Episode 21, The Father, the Son, and the Holy Guest Star. After Bart is expelled from Springfield Elementary, he is enrolled in a Catholic school. Along with Homer, he is soon persuaded to convert to the religion. My trivia about this one is that Marge, Ned, and Reverend Lovejoy ride in a mystery machine. This is obviously a parody of the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo. And my best moment was the school's medieval festival. The season finale gets a 2 out of 5. This is another plot on religion, which we all know this show loves to tackle from time to time, but it's doing it an awful lot lately. It doesn't start heavily focusing on that until the halfway point though. First, we had an intro scene of the school's medieval festival. This worked for me for the most part. We got to see Nelson serving as Martin's guard, which was a nice change of pace. We also got to see Otto giving a guitar solo, as well as a rare sight of Lisa and Martin interacting together. Also, I was kind of glad that Willie got revenge on everyone by putting mice in a pie. Of course, it wasn't so nice for Bart though, as he got blamed for this, and ended up in a Catholic school as a result. I didn't mind the early parts of that. It was interesting to see how he dealt with the strict nuns at the school. Also, Liam Neeson gave a decent performance here as a charming priest. He kind of made it a tad believable that he won Bart over to the religion. And Homer, well, it doesn't take a lot to win him over now, does it? That is where the good bits of the story stop though. The second half of everyone fighting over what religion Bart is felt stale and never really had any meaning to me. Marge was kind of over the top in trying to get Bart back, and the whole thing was a bit of a mess in all honesty. At least Bart stood up for himself in the end, by pointing out the similarities between all of these religions. The comedy here was okay at best, with pretty much all of the good moments coming from Homer. I laughed at him thinking that Plutarch was Mickey Mouse's dog, and his endless list of sins that he has to confess was also pretty fitting. Still though, this was a bit of a mediocre way to finish the season. So with that, I have done all of the season 16 episodes, and here is the season summary. Once I average out the ratings for this season, the average score is a 3.2, which if you have been paying attention to this series, is the highest since season 10. That's a bit of a surprise, and I'll get on to my thoughts on the season in a minute. In terms of my least favourite episodes from this season, The Father, the Son and Holy Guest Star is 5th, Sleeping with the Enemy is 4, Future Drama is 3rd worst, On a Clear Day I Can't See My Sister is 2nd, and I put She Used to Be My Girl as the worst. Although there isn't really a lot between 1 and 2, they're both kind of the lowest end of a 2, but not quite bad enough to be a 1. As for the top 5, The Heartbroke Kid is 5, Thank God It's Doomsday is 4, Mommie Beerest is 3rd, Don't Fear the Roofer is 2nd, and as the only 5 out of 5 episode, There's Something About Marrying is the best of the year. So, this season was a bit of a pleasant surprise for me. I enjoyed it overall, and I think the main reason for that is that most of the episodes had an interesting concept. Now sure, they were not always executed the best, many of them went off the rails a bit with silly endings, still I personally found that pretty much all of the episodes here, even the bad ones, had something there which I found interesting. Because of that, the worst episodes from this season were generally not as bad as the worst episodes from previous seasons, as shown by the fact that this season did not have a single 1 out of 5 episode. I am honestly shocked by that. I never thought a season would do that again. The last time that happened was season 8, so that is quite impressive actually by this season. Now admittedly, on the flip side of that, the best episodes of this season are not all-time classics by any means, so let's not get carried away here. Broadcast news from last season was better than any of the episodes here, so basically what I'm saying is that this season didn't hit the highest of highs, but it was more consistently entertaining than any of the other teen seasons. Because of that, I struggle to say it's a better season than say season 12 for example, which had 3 absolute classic episodes, but was not quite as consistent as this one. It kind of depends what you like, but I definitely think this season is better than season 11, season 13, 14 and 15. Of course though, all of this is just my opinion, and your mileage with this season may vary. Anyway, enough about my subjective view, let's talk about the themes of this season. One which should jump right out at you is the use of religion as a plot point. I mean, 2 of the last 3 episodes of the season had it as a major focus, and it was brought up several other times as well during the season. I didn't mind how they handled it in the main, I especially enjoyed it in Thank God It's Doomsday. Still though, I think I've just about had my fill of religious based stories for now. I don't particularly want to see them showing up next season. In terms of how the characters got on, the season started out very Marge heavy. We got to see her in a baking contest, arguing with an old school friend, making friends with Nelson, and becoming a business partner with Moe. It was nice, but also kind of odd to see Marge get that many stories early on. As the episodes went on, we of course pivoted to a more Homer focused season, with a few Bart and Lisa stories sprinkled in. As for side characters, we got a Moe episode, and even a Selma episode, but I think it was Ned who got the biggest roles here. Now that's maybe not a surprise given all of the religious stories here, but he also had a few stories separate from that. He did a Super Bowl halftime show with Homer, helped smuggle drugs from Canada, and even briefly moved out of Springfield. I do very much like Ned as a character, so having his positive charm around so often was probably a big reason why I liked the general tone of this season. So yeah, that about wraps up my thoughts on this one. A very watchable season that would probably be at the very high end of meh if I had to rank it. I am not sure I can call it good, given I only just gave season 10 a good rating, and that season was better than this one for sure. Still, if you have the time, I'd recommend that you give most of these episodes a watch. They may just surprise you, who knows. Anyway, that's all for this video guys. I hope you can join me next time for season 17. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care.